We are looking at LSAT Prep Test 82, Logic Game Section 2, questions 1 through 7. There are 6 actors: G, M, O, P, S, and U. The actors are placed in west or east wings. The rules are as follows. Rule 1. Each actor must appear exactly one time. Rule 2. S must be placed in the west wing. Rule 3. U must be placed in the east wing. Rule 4. M must be placed earlier than O and P. Rule 5. U must be placed earlier than G. Now let's draw a diagram and make deductions. First, we know that G cannot be placed in the first row because G must always be placed after U. Second, we know that U and M cannot be placed in the last row because there is at least one actor that must be placed after them. Then, let's split the game board into different scenarios. We want to use the most restrictive rules to split the game board. Here we will use the rule that M must be placed before O and P to split the game board. In one scenario, M appears in the first row, in the west wing. In this case, we can place U in the first row in the east wing. This game board can be further split into 2 scenarios, where G is in the west wing and another where G is in the east wing. If G is in the west wing, then S must be placed in the third row to comply with the rule that S must be in the west wing. Then O and P are left to be placed. Let's draw a double-sided arrow to indicate that O and P are interchangeable. If G is in the east wing, and if we look at who can be placed in the third slot for the east wing, either O or P has to be placed in the third row in the east wing because S must be placed in the west wing. Let's draw O and P in the third row and draw a double-sided arrow to indicate that they are interchangeable. Finally, S is left to be placed. Let's draw another double-sided arrow between S and O to indicate that they are interchangeable. Underneath the east wing, let's draw a S with a slash through it to remind us that S cannot be placed in the east wing. Let's draw the game boards where G is in the third row, while M and U are in the first row in the west and east wings respectively. In one scenario, we have G in the third row in the west wing. This would mean that S must be in the second row in the west wing to comply with the rule that S must be in the west wing. This leaves O and P in the second and third rows in the east wing, and they are interchangeable. In another scenario, we have G in the third row in the east wing. This would mean that either O or P must be in the second row in the east wing, and S must be in either second or third rows. Let's draw double-sided arrows to indicate they are interchangeable. This completes all scenarios where M is in the first row in the west wing. Next, let's diagram all possible scenarios where M is in the first row in the east wing. In one instance, U can be placed in the second row in the east wing. This would mean that G can follow U in the third row in the east wing. This would mean that S must be placed in the first row because both O and P must be placed after M. Let's draw a double-sided arrow between O and P. In another instance where M is in the first row in the east wing, it can also mean that G can follow U in the third row but in the west wing. In this case, U must be placed second in the east wing to comply with the rule that U must be earlier than G. Then S must be placed in the first row in the west wing because O and P must appear after M. Let's draw a double-sided arrow between O and P. We can also place M in the second row in the west wing. This would mean that both O and P must be placed in the third row, and they are interchangeable. S must be placed in the last remaining slot for the west wing. Then U must be placed first in the east wing followed by G in the second slot in the east wing to comply with the rule that U must be placed before G. Finally, M can be placed in the second row in the east wing. Same as earlier, O and P must be placed in the third row, and they are interchangeable. G must be placed in the second row because G must be placed after U. U must be placed first in the east wing to comply with the rule that U must be placed in the east wing. Then the last actor remaining is S. Now you're ready to answer the questions.